for the opportunity to present to you and also have a bit of discussion on what we put on the table, this soil, as we call it, soil monitoring law. Actually, it's a proposal for a directive which is called, has a longer name, as it happens, soil monitoring, but also resilience. So it's not only about monitoring. That's one of the important aspects to mention. Of course, we are very much focused on our land within the borders of the EU. As you know, historically, it's a bit a different experience than Brazil. It's very limited compared to the population and the activities we have, and it has been exploited from very different points of view along a long period of time. So, the knowledge improves. I hope I can, or somebody can help me to go on with the presentation. So the knowledge improves, I wouldn't say from day to day, but from year to year, definitely, on the situation of our soils. Situation, as I think I will be showing in a slide, is not good at all, and the conditions of the soils in general across the EU does not have a good trend and a good outlook. Therefore, the Commission is working. We have this soil strategy. Actually, it's a second soil strategy. We had the previous one in the previous decade, but this new soil strategy presented by the Commission a couple of years ago includes one of the, well, there are several actions, obviously, but one important one is this legislative proposal on the soil health. And actually, this is what I'm going to present to you today. It's not the only action in the soil strategy. There is a lot more, and obviously a lot depends on research. And I think we have the colleagues here in our joint research center who have been working also on this soil for a long time. So actually, what we put on the table relies a lot on research, also feedback that we got from various research institutes, but also from a lot of stakeholders. And of course, farming and agricultural lands have been mentioned today. They are extremely important. So we had also a lot of feedback from the farming community, and we're also still engaging with them. But just to mention that this proposal does not only focus on the agricultural lands, but it covers, or soils, it covers all the soils in the EU, so agricultural, covered by forests, also urban soils. It's a broad range. Well, that's the situation. I think it was mentioned in the introductory speeches, both by the ambassador and also the director of FAO. The soil is under a lot of pressure. I think this is an issue across the globe, even more so in the EU, where, as I was mentioning, the soils have been subject to a lot of human-related activities. But now we are also seeing, all of us, around what is happening also with this impact of more extreme weather events, stronger winds, floods, also fires and so on, which leave, unfortunately, effects and an imprint on the soil. So we need also to take into account not only what has accumulated and the normal activities, but also the impact of more problematic events. Well, we looked into all these pressures with our impact assessment. As you know, whenever the Commission proposes legislative initiative, it's subject to a thorough impact assessment. That's no surprise, and we've tried to put together all the data we could manage. Still, there are knowledge gaps, so that's why also we have this focus, which is also reflected in the title of the proposal, soil monitoring, because that would be actually, if this hopefully it's adopted, the rest of the decade would be dedicated to improving the knowledge, improving the monitoring. So we know enough to worry about it, but we don't know enough for the moment to be able to underpin specific action at let's say, on the various soils, which are very diverse also in the EU, even if we are confined, let's say, mainly to the temperate area, but still with that we have many types of soils which are also affected to different climatic and climatic conditions. So I will not enter too much into the details of this. If you want to know more, we have this impact assessment also in the proposal itself. We have the explanatory memorandum where we go a bit into this different types of pressures. What it's worth saying in connection to this, and actually bridging with the proposal itself, is that we have used these main types of degradations of soil to identify descriptors based on which we should analyze the soil. We should define what is healthy and what an unhealthy soil is. I would come directly on this, but basically that's kind of the logic of our intervention. So the main feature of the proposal, I already mentioned that it covers all the soils in the territory of the member states. It's a staged approach, developing the knowledge base in order to be able to intervene wisely there. I think agriculture was mentioned also, and it was described in the context of Brazil by a previous speaker. We want to improve the situation of the condition of soil, the health of soil. We know that this is particularly important for farming, for agriculture, but on the other hand, it's extremely important what type of measures, what type of mix of measures we put in place, because sometimes they might have unwanted effects. So we want to avoid that. Therefore, we think it's important to develop this knowledge base. We don't have a lot of time now, but we have some specific research programs dedicated on the top of, at EU level, on the top of what is happening in the member states. We have this in the context of the Horizon program. We have the Soil Mission, which actually looks into particular, for example, measures to be taken on to improve the condition of various soils. So let's say the knowledge improves as we speak, and we wanted to leave a bit of flexibility in the directive, and I will come immediately on that. In the proposal, actually, it's not yet a directive. So that's why we have this flexible and proportionate intervention, and also it builds on what is happening in the member states, because some of them do have monitoring of soil. So we want to use that, not start from scratch, and as I said, there is some knowledge. Now, this is, if you want, this snake is kind of a snapshot of the structure of the proposal with the main building blocks. The first part looks into the objectives, and then we go to the definitions, and, which are key, obviously, to speak, have a common language among the 27 member states, and that's a challenge in itself. Then we have this monitoring and assessment, so checking the condition of the soils. And I was saying in time, I think I'll have a slide on the timing as such. This would cover the rest of the decade if the proposal is adopted, let's say 2025. Then we have, and we insist on this, not too many provisions, but important ones on the service and support, especially for the soil managers, farmers in particular. That's extremely important to take them on board. An exclusive top-down approach, so imposing measures on them without explaining, without showcasing good examples, good practices, we think it will not work. So that's also part of the flexibility we are giving. In some cases, I think the member states will decide, and we have the flexibility in what we propose to go on with voluntary measures, not necessarily with obligatory ones. In some cases, this would be also needed. And then, as I said, it's not only about, so the title might be sometimes misleading, but it's not only monitoring, it's also the resilience. So part 5, or building block 5, relates to sustainable soil management. That's a critical part. It's Article 10, if you want to look more into the details. So this looks into the practices that should be put in place for both sustainable soil management, but also what we call a regeneration of unhealthy soils. And then we have a dedicated chapter on contaminated sites, and at the end of it we have what we call the reporting, but it's actually a governance of the proposal, Commission and the member states, and so on. Some provisions to make it work. Now the next slides would go a bit into the details of each of the building blocks. The objective, and that's a critical one, it's healthy soils by 2050. That's already in the strategy that I mentioned, soil strategy I mentioned earlier. Well, this is in a way a soft objective. We have reflected at length on this in the impact assessment. Actually, the result there, the preferred option, would have been a hard, legally binding, let's say, objective of 2050, but because of the knowledge gap, because of, well, for some of the features of the soil, conditions of the soil, the types of degradation, I think we know more. We can safely say, okay, this is the pathway up to 2050. That would be the effort. Those would be the cost and benefits. For some others, however, it's more difficult to say. So therefore, we left it on purpose. You know, as a soft, still a clear objective, but a soft one, so there's no legally binding obligation to achieve healthy soils by 2050. Now, this involves also certain risks that okay, might not be there by 2050. Therefore, the proposal includes in it provision on an early evaluation by the Commission, whereby we take stock of the first assessment of soils. And then the additional knowledge which would be there, and then we might come with more demanding targets, well, subject to discussions with the legislators. And as it is a directive, so a legislative initiative by the Commission, this would need to be approved, obviously, by the Council and the European Parliament. So in terms of definitions, that's something critical. So just 3 points, but important ones. So I said already that the soil, a healthy soil, is defined by using about 11 descriptors. They are in Annex 1 if you want to have a more thorough look, and that probably many of you have already. So there are 3 categories based on what we know about the soils. In the first category, we have those descriptors for which criteria can be established at EU level. By criteria, I mean, well, that's technical, but also interesting. By criteria, I mean some kind of range outside which we can say that the soil would lose, there will be a critical loss of capacity of soils to provide ecosystem services. And that's a key concept. This is what we are looking at. When a soil take erosion, at what level of erosion the soil in general would lose its capacity to produce ecosystem services. In other words, and put it more kind of in layman language, is like when the soil starts to lose its functions, become non-functional in terms of producing food, in terms of, you know, I think it was mentioned this morning, act as a water sponge and so on, water filter and so on. So for some of these indicators, I mentioned already soil erosion is also the carbon content, and there are others as well. This can be established across the EU at EU level, so we are proposing something. Maybe something important when we say capacity that we are analyzing, and we are using this, you know, capacity of soils to lose what loss of capacity to provide ecosystem services. It means that we are not going for a, you know, extremely ambitious level. So if we make a parallel with the, you know, healthy human, I think, well, each of us have, you know, health issues, but it doesn't mean that we are not functional. So we are looking at the more basic level when, for example, you know, if we take the same metaphor, the lungs are no longer or starting not to function. The fact that we have a cough, that's not a problem. So In the example of soil, we can accept erosion up to a certain level. It's fine, it's not desirable. In ideal conditions, it should not be there. But the question is at what level the soil is compromised or starts to be compromised. So that's kind of the thinking of that. Category B, let's say the second category, we have a range of descriptors where it's too difficult at this stage or not possible simply to cover all the soils and all the conditions in the EU with the common criteria or range. But it is possible to do that looking at the different types of soils and conditions underpinning them. And then do this at national level. So there is a requirement for the member states to do so for a number of indicators, not so many, because altogether, as I said, we have about 11. And then, that would be the case for contamination of soil. And then we have the third category, biodiversity in soil, for example, for which we think at this stage of science is not possible to identify for sure this kind of range and to say, well, below that or above that, soils would lose their capacity to provide ecosystem services. A lot of research is going into that. For example, the biodiversity in soil. We know that's something important that needs to be monitored. But for the moment, we are not coming with clear requirements on this. That would be something to develop in future. But we think it's something we need to start somewhere, even if we start more modestly. And if you are to live with an idea from here, and all the rest, all the technicalities and so on, go away, I think, that would be one, probably the most important one. We need to start somewhere. I think it's not the first time the Commission tries to propose something on this. We don't do it only for the sake of covering, the soil, because the rest, water, air, and so on are already covered by European legislation, but because we see a real need. And because of that, because we could actually compare what we put on the table today and the situation today with what has been there, I think, 15, 16 years ago when we proposed the previous framework directive on soils, we see that the situation is not going well. So there is a need to start somewhere, and we think that by putting in place something, even if it's not easy, some of you are in research and so on, it's not very easy to agree on a kind of set of indicators, for example. But still, if we manage to put something in place, this would spur research, also the financing, and also try to have and will have some kind of common minimal denominator across all the member states. Because as we see, the soils are given attention in some of the member states, not so much in others. Now we had this, and we had a lot of questions on this, on our one out, all out principle. Well, it's not in the directive as such, in the proposal as such, but the idea is there that we would, if a soil fails one of these indicators, for example, it's a lot of contamination or, I don't know, erosion, at such a level that its capacity is compromised, we consider it to be unhealthy. Well, some call this one out, all out, because one fails, then you would consider to be the soil unhealthy. In a bit, it's a bit misleading again, because obviously, if a soil fails 5 descriptors, obviously measures would need to be taken to cover all this. It would be more important measures to be put in place to recover the healthy soil, compared with the situation when one descriptor only is problematic. Land take. That's also something important. It's one of the main, I think you might have spotted it in the previous slide. We had this, and I promise I'll go fast through the other slides, but that's something important in relation to farming, because in the EU, I think we are losing a lot of agricultural land to other developments. Of course, this is a need, and it's a pressing need in some member states, so it's based on objective problems and needs there. But we cannot disregard the fact that about 400 square kilometers each year are being sealed. So lost to development, so that's natural land, so that's semi-natural, what we call agriculture, forestry, and so on. So there we see a pressure. We are not coming with a target there. We have it in the strategy, this this known objective of no net land take by 2050. But we are not coming with such an objective here. What we are coming with on the land take is a common definition, also the monitoring in the same way across the use, to know what we are dealing with, know the causes and so on, and also with what we call this mitigation and compensation principles, so that we avoid that land is taken more than really needed, and if it's taken, maybe not the best, the most valuable lands are taken. So that's something which we are starting to deal with, but of course there is a lot of discussion whether we should have a binding target on this or not. Now, monitoring and assessment, that's something very technical. What I want to say there that, well, this builds on the monitoring as such on what is being done by the member states, some of them, but also what is being done since 2009 by the Commission, because the Commission, via a program run with the help of Vestat and the colleagues in JRC, called Lucas Soil, is doing this monitoring of soils across the EU. But we need a more thorough monitoring. We try to use this experience that we developed with Lucas soil, and we try to do some kind of harmonization. I mean, not start from scratch in the member states, as I said, but do some and build on what will be we have there. We also want to develop remote sensing. We know for certain descriptors and indicators that's possible, and the technology is developing. And we really want to help and also develop Lucas soil so that we shoulder the burden in the member states. The network is a representative one. We are having discussions now in the legislative process how to do it, so it would not mean monitoring of each plot of land at this stage because of the burden and so on. And we have certain algorithms that we are putting in place to ensure the representativity. And some cases in some member states is done based on other criteria. So this is what we are doing. Now, at the end of the monitoring, there will be the assessment of soil, and because it's a representative monitoring, some extrapolation would need to be done there. So that's why it's kind of singled out at the end of this process. Now, services and support, I already mentioned the Lucas use of remote sensing. Copernicus will put in place also a digital soil health data portal. We have there already some experience with the soil observatory, which is done by our colleagues in JRC again. And other features that I'm not, for the lack of time, I will not go into that. Sustainable soil management. There, what I want to mention is that we are only coming up, proposing a list of binding principles, at the broad level of intervention, but the establishment of the management practices would be left at the national level. The involvement of the stakeholders, in particular the soil managers, would be critical. We are also putting in place a requirement based on what we are doing under the Common Agricultural Policy for this independent advice. And also training. Contaminated sites, we have a big issue there, so that's kind of it's connected with the rest of the proposal, but it's kind of lex specialis. So we have about 2.8 million previously industrial sites, so anthropogenic pollution. Only a tiny part of them have been really investigated and treated. We want it, so it's more historical because, currently with the new legislation, industrial emissions, waste management and so on, these kind of situations are no longer appearing, at least not compared with what is happening in the past. But we want to deal with this issue also because of the pressure on the land take and so on. Many of these sites could be reclaimed for other better purposes, building and so on. On the other hand, there is a risk that if not properly investigating, they are really used for other reasons, development and so on, and they contain dangerous substances and so on. So this chapter 4 of the proposal deals with that, but I don't have now the time. It's a risk-based approach, so it provides a lot of flexibility. For the member states, what we want there is that unacceptable risk to health and environment is dealt with, is reduced. So again, we are not going at elimination of all contamination, or we are not even prescribing, although we are coming up with a list of indicative measures, but we are not prescribing how a contaminated site should be treated, as long as the measures put in place reduce the contamination to a level which is considered to be acceptable. But that's for each member state to be analyzed and defined. And of course, in the future, we will further analyze how the situation is being done. Governance, I don't think I will mention too much about this. I mentioned already the evaluation and review. We need to work very closely with the experts in the member states on this. So that's the timeline for implementation of the directive. Is a very tight one. So basically, we want that this is transposed 2 years after the adoption, and then there will be 3 more years to do the first measurement and assessment of soils, and then the measures can start to be put in place. For the contaminated sites, what we propose there is that there are 3 phases. The first phase of identify potentially contaminated sites is done in 7 years from the date of the entry into force. But then the investigation and the management of contaminated sites, it's more difficult to say, depending on the site, how much it will take, so that there we don't have a deadline as well. There will be a cyclical, this is what we are proposing, a cyclical monitoring. So every 5 years in our proposal, but we are discussing this, the timeline with the member states. So that would be it. Sorry if I was too long. I wanted to give you a bit of insight also. But at a certain point I'll need to leave, so not too much time for questions. Thank you.